The Galactic Council's first encounter with humanity. The massive crystal dome of the Galactic Council chamber stood in stark contrast to the cold, sterile nature of the space around it. Under the light of 3 distant suns, it glittered like an intricate jewel, its surfaces reflecting the grandeur of the highest governing body in the galaxy. Alien representatives from hundreds of different species, some elegant, some terrifying, some strange beyond description, sat in their appointed seats, each a representative of their unique civilization. They waited, their collective attention fixed on the central holographic display, which flickered with images of Earth. High Counselor Reed, a towering figure with a sleek, scaled body and 4 eyes, began his address. His voice carried across the chamber, calm but authoritative. "This is Earth," he said, tapping a series of commands into the holographic interface. A blue planet appeared in front of them, orbiting a yellow star. A level 4 civilization, still struggling to reach their own moon. A species that refuses to join the Galactic Council and instead continues to expand their primitive military presence in their local space. A ripple of murmurs ran through the chamber. It was a sight that the Council had not anticipated. A level 4 species, a primitive, barely evolved race, defying the united forces of the galaxy. The Council had encountered rebellious species before, but never had one openly refused to join the fold. The representative from the Keter species, a species with 7 insectoid eyes and metallic exoskeletons, raised an appendage and spoke in a voice like grinding metal. A species that refuses to join the Council. But they are so simple. We have faced such species before. Their minds are too limited to understand the value of unity. Reed glanced at the Keter representative and nodded in agreement. Exactly. They have not reached the intellectual heights required to comprehend the benefits of our protection. They still operate under the delusion that they can defend themselves. The holographic image shifted, showing the human planet's crude orbital defense platforms. These, Reed continued, are their so-called defenses. Simple kinetic weapons, chemical rockets, and rudimentary energy shields, nothing that could pose a real threat to our superior technology. He tapped another button, and a schematic of Earth's primary military bases appeared on the screen. Even their most advanced weapons are laughable when compared to the might of the Council's fleets. We have nothing to fear from them. But Commander White, a seasoned strategist who had observed countless military campaigns across the galaxy, was not convinced. He sat in the center of the chamber, his reptilian eyes narrowing with suspicion as he studied the display. Something didn't sit right with him. As he stared at the Earth's defenses, his unease grew. He had seen many primitive species before, but the humans, their setup wasn't as it seemed. With a slow, deliberate motion, White stood from his seat, his presence commanding the room's attention. "If I may, High Counselor." His voice, low and steady, cut through the murmurs that filled the chamber. Reed's expression darkened. "What is it, Commander?" White's gaze remained fixed on the hologram as he spoke. "There's something strange about their defenses. I've fought in countless campaigns, and I've studied the art of war extensively. These humans, while primitive in terms of technology, seem to be hiding something. Their defenses are laid out too simply, too predictably. It's almost as if they want us to think their weapons are weak, to make us feel overconfident. The gaps in their coverage, they're deliberate." Reed scoffed and shook his head. "Commander, they still use combustion engines in their ground vehicles. Their computers are old, based on silicon chips. Their technology barely qualifies as advanced. Surely, you don't think that they—" "I don't believe their weapons are weak," White interrupted. "What I believe is that we're being manipulated. Every military strategy I've studied teaches one fundamental truth. If an enemy presents obvious weaknesses, it's often a trap." His voice grew quieter, but more intense as he spoke. "I don't think they're as primitive as they appear. These gaps, they're not mistakes. They're deliberate. We're walking right into a trap, and we're blind to it." The chamber fell silent. Reed frowned, unsure of how to respond. His hands trembled slightly as he looked back at the display, his mind racing. Was White's suspicion valid? Could this primitive species actually have the cunning to devise a trap like this? It was unthinkable. And yet White's argument struck a chord within him. The unease in his gut grew stronger. But the council had already decided. The vote was nearly unanimous. The plan would proceed. Reed, still skeptical, gestured to his control panel. "I suggest we send Battle Group 7. 30 ships, each capable of destroying a small moon. A simple demonstration of force should suffice. A few calculated strikes, a clear warning. The humans will see our power and understand their place." The other council members nodded, some murmuring in agreement. After all, they had used this tactic countless times before with much weaker species. A show of overwhelming strength would break their resolve, and they would fall in line with the council's will, just as every other species had. Commander White, however, was not so easily convinced. He stood again, the muscles in his body tense with a mix of frustration and foreboding. "I strongly advise against it, High Counselor. I spent my life studying military strategy, and there's something about this situation that's wrong. We are underestimating them. If we proceed with this, we may not only lose, but we may lose terribly." His warning went unheeded. The council was already set on its course, their minds made up. They believed in their power, and they were not about to let a primitive species dictate terms. As the council members filed out of the chamber, Reed stayed behind. His thoughts were consumed by Commander White's warning. Could it be true? Could the humans actually be hiding something far more dangerous than their technology appeared to suggest? He returned to the holographic display, zooming in on Earth's defenses, studying them more carefully. His mind raced as he picked apart the details. The energy signatures on some of their platforms were too low for their size, too inconsistent. It was as if the humans had deliberately created these false readings to mislead any would-be invaders. But why? What was their true strategy? Reed sighed heavily and turned off the hologram. "I hope I'm wrong," he muttered under his breath. "For all our sakes." As he left the chamber, the weight of the impending conflict hung over him. In just 3 days, Battle Group 7 would arrive in the Sol system, and the fate of humanity, and perhaps the galaxy, would be decided. The battle begins. The vast emptiness of space stretched out before Battle Group 7 as it emerged from hyperspace. The 30 ships of the alien fleet formed a perfectly synchronized arrowhead formation, each warship a colossal testament to the Council's superior technology. They glided effortlessly into position, their sleek hulls gleaming under the light of the distant sun. Admiral Green, commander of the fleet, surveyed the scene with a cold, calculating gaze. The mission was simple: enter Earth's orbit, issue the ultimatum, and crush any resistance. The humans would bow to the Council's overwhelming might, just as countless civilizations had done before them. The first order was given without hesitation. "Send the demand," Green commanded, his voice unwavering. A communication officer quickly transmitted the Council's message to Earth: surrender or face destruction. A few moments later, the message returned, but not in the form Green expected. Instead of a straightforward response, a strange audio file began playing across the fleet's communication channels. The music was ancient, a human song from centuries past, filled with defiance and hope. The lyrics spoke of standing strong, of never giving in, and of fighting until the end. The song was simple, almost naive in its innocence, but its message was clear: the humans would not yield. Green's lips curled into a sneer as he listened to the music. "Primitive defiance," he muttered. "They think they can intimidate us with their music." His amusement was evident. This was not a species that could pose a threat to the might of the Galactic Council. "Continue the attack," he ordered. The fleet moved forward, undeterred by the humans' pathetic attempt at resistance. Green watched as the weapons of the human defenses, nothing more than a few rudimentary satellites and poorly designed orbital platforms, loomed into view. They were insignificant, barely even worth acknowledging. "Let's show them the power of the Council," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. "Our shields will easily absorb whatever they throw at us." But as the fleet advanced, something strange began to happen. The human satellites, simple devices that had seemed so easily ignored, suddenly sprang to life. Each one split open like a flower blooming, releasing a dense cloud of what appeared to be metal dust. The particles swirled and danced in space, reflecting the light of the stars as they formed an impenetrable barrier around the fleet. "Sir, the sensors are picking up strange readings," the sensor officer reported, his voice cracking with uncertainty. "We can't get accurate scans through this cloud. It's interfering with everything." Green stared at the tactical display, his brow furrowing. "What is this? Some kind of primitive trick?" But before he could issue another command, the alien fleet's fighters launched in response. Sleek and fast, the fighters cut through the metal dust, their engines roaring as they raced toward the human satellites. They were supposed to clear a path, to neutralize the threat with ease. But as the fighters moved closer, they encountered a shocking complication. The metal dust was sticking to the fighters' hulls. The more they tried to push through, the worse the situation became. One by one, their engines began to sputter, their power systems failing. "It's some kind of smart metal," the science officer shouted, panic rising in his voice. "It's infiltrating our power systems." The fighters' engines died mid-flight, and the ships began to drift helplessly in space. "Launch more fighters," Green barked, his command fueled by desperation. "Clear a path. Now." But his order came too late. The human ships, which had previously appeared primitive and clunky, now revealed their true power. Dozens of them emerged from behind Earth's moon, their shapes blocky and unrefined compared to the sleek vessels of the Council. At first, Green thought they were nothing more than primitive transports, an afterthought in the grand scheme of the battle. But as the human ships moved with surprising speed and precision, Green's confidence began to waver. "Impossible," Green whispered, as he watched the human vessels dart through space with the agility of predatory animals. They had no advanced technology, nothing the Council could recognize, and yet they seemed to anticipate every move the fleet made. Each ship moved in an intricate, almost impossible pattern, weaving through the debris and asteroid fields near the moon. The human ships fired their weapons, but not in the way Green had expected. Instead of energy beams or plasma torpedoes, they launched metal projectiles, simple, unrefined, and yet devastating. The projectiles traveled at incredible speeds, far beyond anything Green had anticipated. They struck the alien fleet's shields with a powerful force that even the Council's advanced energy barriers struggled to contain. The first hit came as a shock. The kinetic impact sent ripples through the fleet's shields, and the sensor arrays of several ships began to short-circuit. "Their weapons," the tactical officer stammered. "They're not targeting the ships themselves. They're targeting our sensor arrays, our weapons systems." Green's eyes widened in disbelief. "They're not trying to destroy us. They're trying to disable us." The human ships continued their assault, launching wave after wave of metal projectiles, each one expertly aimed at the fleet's weak points. The projectiles splintered into smaller fragments upon impact, each one targeting a specific system. The sensors, the weapons, the engines. The alien ships, once the pride of the Galactic Council, now found themselves struggling to maintain control. "We can't fight what we don't understand," the second-in-command murmured, his voice filled with dread. "They know our weaknesses. We're being outmaneuvered by a species that's barely above the level of a primitive tribe." Green, in disbelief, watched as more of his fleet's ships fell into chaos. The human vessels moved as though they were reading the Council's every move, anticipating their tactics before they even happened. It was as if they were playing a game, but the Council's fleet was the unwitting pawn. "Launch our second wave of fighters," Green commanded, his voice laced with urgency. But it was too late. The fighters, unable to launch due to the smart metal that had clogged their bays, remained grounded. The human ships, seemingly unstoppable, pressed their advantage, picking apart the alien fleet piece by piece. A new message flashed across the fleet's communication channels, transmitted with chilling calmness. "This is Admiral Jones of the Earth Defense Force. Your ships have been disabled using our first-generation space warfare tactics. Please note that we have deliberately avoided causing casualties. This is your only warning. Leave Earth's space, or we will be forced to demonstrate our second-generation capabilities." Green's heart sank. His fleet, once unstoppable, was now powerless. 10 ships were completely disabled, and the rest of the fleet was scattered, disorganized, unable to defend themselves. The human ships, using nothing more than simple physics and clever tactics, had turned the tide of the battle. Green's voice, once full of confidence, now trembled as he gave the order. "Retreat. All ships, retreat." But as the alien fleet limped back into hyperspace, Green couldn't help but wonder. If these were humanity's first-generation tactics, what else could they do? What had they been hiding? The Council, in their arrogance, had underestimated the humans. And now, they were paying the price. Humanity's resourcefulness. In the aftermath of their humiliating defeat, the Galactic Council convened once more. The shimmering crystal dome, where the highest-ranking officials gathered to discuss matters of galactic importance, now seemed almost suffocating to the council members. The vast, polished chamber echoed with uneasy murmurs as the alien representatives, some humbled, some furious, took their seats. For the first time in their long existence, the council faced a species that had outwitted them. High Counselor Reed, his voice steady but laced with frustration, addressed the assembly. "We underestimated them. We thought they were primitive, incapable of advanced tactics or strategy. We were wrong." He paced slowly in front of the assembly, his fingers tapping rhythmically against the smooth surface of the control panel. The holographic display before him flickered with images of the battle. It showed the devastation wrought by the humans, how their seemingly crude weapons had crippled the advanced alien fleet. A chill ran through Reed's spine as he replayed the images of Earth's smart metal, the clever use of metal projectiles, and the precise maneuvering of the human ships. "We now know what we are dealing with," Reed continued, "but we must not let this failure define us. Our next move must be decisive." The Council's tactical director, a slender alien with elongated limbs named Arigax, spoke up, his voice sharp. "The humans are clever, but they cannot outlast us. Their industrial capacity is primitive. They have few resources, no true manufacturing power. Their ships are inefficient, their supply lines weak. If we outlast them, they will have no choice but to submit. But their ingenuity is not something we can simply ignore," countered Commander White, who had once again remained behind after the meeting in the war room. He could sense the tension building. His mind was still reeling from the events at Earth. "It is true that they lack the vast fleets and resources we possess, but the way they adapt, how they improvise, could turn the tide in a prolonged conflict." Reed's expression darkened as he looked at White. "You believe they can outproduce us?" "No," White answered slowly, choosing his words carefully, "but their approach to problem-solving is unorthodox. They don't need to build ships in the traditional sense. They will use what's available to them, exploit every weakness, and adapt faster than we can anticipate." White's warning lingered in the air, but the Council seemed unwilling to hear it. Their pride, bruised from their recent defeat, wanted to strike back, to prove that they were still the superior force in the galaxy. And so, they decided to shift their focus. The humans may have been able to disable their ships in space, but on the ground, they believed they would have the upper hand. "We will land ground forces on Earth's moon," Reed declared, his voice cold. "There we will establish a base and use our military superiority to crush their morale. If we control their moon, we control their access to space." The Council was quick to approve the plan. Earth's moon was a barren, lifeless rock. Surely, the humans couldn't mount a significant defense against a full-scale invasion of such magnitude. Or so they thought. Part 4. The Moon Invasion. General Stone, a towering figure of the Galactic Council's elite forces, was chosen to lead the ground invasion. He was renowned for his unwavering confidence and his brutal efficiency in battle. Stone's soldiers wore heavy-powered exosuits capable of withstanding extreme environments and delivering devastating firepower. The Council believed that with their superior technology and training, nothing could stand in their way. The first wave of the invasion landed on the moon's dark side, far from Earth's watchful eyes. 10,000 of the Council's finest soldiers marched across the rocky, dust-covered terrain. Their boots left deep imprints in the fine lunar dust as they advanced toward the human base, the silence of space surrounding them. The moon base, which had been hidden in the darkness of the far side of the moon, appeared to be abandoned. It looked eerily still, giving the invaders a false sense of security. "This is almost too easy," muttered Captain Pike, the leader of the Council's first strike team. His voice, like the others, was thick with arrogance. They were the finest soldiers in the galaxy, equipped with the best technology. Nothing could stop them. However, the first sign that something was amiss came when the soldiers' heavy exosuits began to feel heavier. At first, it was barely noticeable, just a slight increase in the weight of their suits. But as they trudged forward, the sensation grew more intense, until it felt as though the gravity on the moon had suddenly increased. Captain Pike's sensors immediately began to flicker. "What's happening?" he demanded. "Our suits should be able to handle this. There's no gravity well here." The truth became clear only when they looked down at the ground. The fine lunar dust, which had seemed so inconsequential, was alive with tiny machines, each one attached to their suits, gradually adding weight and slowing them down. "It's a trap," Pike shouted, his voice cracking with disbelief. "This isn't dust. It's some kind of nanotechnology, a swarm of tiny machines. They're infesting our suits." The soldiers began to panic as their mobility slowed, their movements becoming sluggish and labored. But before they could react, the ground beneath them trembled. Hidden doors in the moon's surface slid open, and from the darkness emerged a fleet of strange, towering vehicles. Human-made tanks, but unlike anything the Council had ever seen. These were not your average terrestrial tanks. They were flat and wide, designed specifically for the low gravity of the moon. Instead of wheels or tracks, they had 6 articulated legs, allowing them to walk across the lunar surface like massive crabs. The tanks were armed with enormous weapons capable of decimating anything in their path. Pike issued orders to his troops to form defensive positions, but the soldiers were too slow. Their suits, now weighed down by the smart dust, restricted their movements, and they struggled to get into position. The tanks fired, but not with conventional shells. Instead, they launched a series of nets made from an unknown metal that wrapped around the alien soldiers, entangling them in seconds. "Move! Get free!" Pike shouted, but the nets were too strong. The low gravity made it even harder to fight back. The soldiers floated helplessly in the nets, unable to escape their entanglement. Then, the moon's surface cracked open again. From beneath the ground, human soldiers emerged from a hidden network of tunnels, their movements smooth and fluid. They wore light armor, far less advanced than the Council's exosuits, but they were nimble. They moved like acrobats, bouncing from one place to another in the low gravity, using the environment to their advantage. Pike's soldiers fired their energy weapons, but the shots missed wildly. The humans were too fast, too unpredictable. The soldiers tried to react, but they were quickly overwhelmed by the human soldiers' speed and precision. "We are being outmaneuvered," Pike grunted. "These humans, they're not just fighting. They're playing with us." The human soldiers used basic magnetic guns that fired metal slugs at the alien exosuits. The simple projectiles, which should have been ineffective against their advanced armor, were actually designed to stick to the alien suits, slowly drilling into the joints and disabling their systems. The Council's soldiers could do nothing as their advanced technology failed them in the face of the humans' creativity and adaptability. Soon, Pike realized the inevitable. The alien forces were surrounded. No matter how hard they fought, they couldn't gain the upper hand. They were trapped in a net of their own making, outsmarted by a species they had underestimated. A voice crackled over Pike's communication system. "This is Colonel Black of the Earth Defense Force, Moon Division. Your forces are surrounded. We've disabled most of your weapons and mobility systems. Surrender now, and we'll ensure your survival." Pike's heart sank as he looked around. His troops were either trapped in nets or pinned down by human soldiers who seemed to come from every direction. The humans had turned the very environment of the moon into a weapon against them. "We surrender," Pike said, his voice resigned. The Council's soldiers, the finest warriors in the galaxy, had been beaten not by superior technology, but by the humans' adaptability and understanding of their environment. They had taken what seemed like a simple, lifeless rock and turned it into a battlefield where only the most creative tactics could prevail. Adapting to the environment, the ground invasion of the moon had failed spectacularly. The Galactic Council's once proud soldiers, equipped with the most advanced armor and weaponry in the galaxy, had been outmatched by the simple ingenuity of Earth's defenders. General Stone, the commanding officer of the invasion force, watched in disbelief as his troops, trained for years in the most elite combat tactics, were reduced to helpless prisoners. The human forces, with their homemade weapons and unrefined technology, had turned the tide with creativity alone. As the last of the alien soldiers were rounded up and herded into containment units, Stone stood on the moon's surface, his mind spinning with questions. How had the humans done it? They didn't have the firepower to match the Council's advanced weaponry. And yet, they had completely outwitted them. In a matter of hours, the moon, a place the Council thought of as barren and lifeless, had become a trap. A trap where even the most sophisticated technology in the galaxy had failed. "This can't be happening," Stone muttered, his voice a mixture of disbelief and frustration. "We're the most powerful military force in the galaxy, and we've been beaten by farmers with tools." His second-in-command, a smaller alien named Drana, had been watching the moon base through a viewport. She turned to him, her insectoid eyes narrowing. "I've been analyzing their tactics, General. It wasn't just their technology that won this fight. It was their understanding of the environment. They used the low gravity to their advantage. Their tanks, those strange walking machines, they were made for this terrain. They anticipated every move we made. Every strategy we relied on was useless against them." Stone paced furiously. "We had the advantage. We had better weapons, better armor. We should have crushed them." Drana hesitated before responding. "Perhaps it's not about better weapons. Perhaps it's about something else, something we haven't considered." The Galactic Council's realization. Back on the homeworld of the Galactic Council, the leaders gathered in the Crystal Dome once again. This time, the atmosphere was different. There was no longer the same air of arrogance or superiority. Instead, the members of the Council sat in solemn silence, their minds reeling from the humiliating defeat. High Counselor Reed stood at the center, his expression grim. "The moon base has fallen," he said, his voice cutting through the silence. "We believed that our superior technology would allow us to crush the humans. But we were wrong. Our soldiers, our finest warriors, were outsmarted, not outgunned." A murmur rippled through the assembly. The Council had never been in a situation like this. A primitive species had completely turned the tables on them, using nothing but basic ingenuity. Reed glanced over at Commander White, who had insisted on caution from the beginning. "You were right, Commander," Reed said quietly. "We misjudged them." White, who had spent the last few days in seclusion, reviewing battle reports and analyzing the data, nodded slowly. "They didn't defeat us because they were stronger. They defeated us because they understood how to adapt." They use their environment to their advantage in ways we never considered. It's not about better technology. It's about their ability to innovate, to see opportunities where we see limitations. Reed's face darkened, and we have no idea what they're capable of. Commander White's voice was grave. We've only seen the beginning. They may not have the advanced technology we do, but their ability to adapt, to improvise, it'll only get better. Reed turned his gaze to the holographic map of Earth. We must find a way to neutralize them. If we cannot defeat them on the moon, then we must strike at their core. They've taken the moon, but their true strength lies on their homeworld. The council members exchanged nervous glances. Earth was a far more complex and difficult target than the moon. Its cities were sprawling, its terrain varied, and its people unpredictable. But the humans had already demonstrated that they could turn the tide of a battle with nothing more than creativity and resourcefulness. Now, the council had to figure out how to outmaneuver them on their own soil. The Earth strategy. General Stone, still reeling from the loss on the moon, was summoned by Reed to attend a strategy meeting at the Crystal Dome. The general, despite his defeat, was one of the most respected military minds in the galaxy, but even he felt a sense of dread as he stepped into the grand chamber. The alien representatives, whose once confident gazes had now turned to apprehensive glances, turned their attention to him. "General, we need your input," Reed said, his voice sharp. "The moon was a failure. We cannot afford to make the same mistake again. How do we conquer Earth?" Stone hesitated. "We've underestimated them at every turn. Their defenses are more cunning than we thought. They've adapted to every challenge we've presented them with. But Earth is vast. Their population is enormous. They have sprawling cities and resources that we cannot even begin to imagine. I suggest we take a different approach, one that we haven't tried yet." Reed raised an eyebrow. "What do you propose?" Stone's face was drawn with the weight of the situation. "We need to separate them, break their unity. The humans are not a single cohesive force like the Council. They have different nations, different ideologies, different cultures. If we can exploit their divisions, we can undermine their resolve." A murmur of agreement spread across the chamber. The Council had always believed in unity as the foundation of strength. The idea of division, of exploiting human weakness, seemed like a logical next step. But Commander White, ever cautious, spoke up once more. "That's a dangerous path, General," he warned. "If we push them too far, they may rally together. They've shown before that they can unite when threatened." Stone was undeterred. "Let them unite. Let them think they have no choice but to stand together. But they will fracture when the pressure becomes too great. We can create chaos, disrupt their governments, and incite infighting." Reed nodded thoughtfully. "A tactic of division. Yes, I see the potential, but we need to be careful. We don't want to push them to the point of desperation. They may surprise us again." Earth's response. Meanwhile, on Earth, the humans were already preparing for the next phase of the conflict. They had seen the full force of the Council's power, first in space, then on the moon, and yet they were far from defeated. Admiral Jones, leader of the Earth Defense Force, was in the midst of briefing his commanders. His calm demeanor belied the intensity of the situation. The humans had faced a devastating attack, but they had also learned something crucial. They could win. They could outsmart the Council, even when they appeared to be outgunned. "We've seen their strength," Jones said, his voice steady. "They have technology far beyond ours, but we have something they don't. Creativity. The ability to adapt, to change our tactics when the situation demands it. This war isn't just about firepower. It's about how we use our minds." One of his senior officers, Colonel Green, spoke up. "But they've shown that they can adapt too. We can't keep using the same tricks. We need to think ahead, stay unpredictable." Jones nodded. "Exactly. Our advantage isn't just in our technology or resources. It's in our unpredictability. We need to stay ahead of them at every turn. Use their arrogance against them. The humans had already turned the tide once, on the moon, in space, and they knew that the Council, despite their advanced technology, had one crucial weakness: their inability to understand humanity's unique approach to problem-solving. The Council relied on their superiority in technology, numbers, and tactics, but the humans had something far more dangerous: an unyielding will to survive and an uncanny ability to think outside the box. As Jones and his team discussed their next move, they knew one thing for certain: this war was far from over. The Council had underestimated humanity's strength once, but it wouldn't make that mistake again. And when the Council came for Earth's homeworld, the humans would be ready. The counterattack. The Galactic Council, after its humiliating defeat on the moon, was facing an existential crisis. The humans, with their unexpected tactics and relentless ingenuity, had repeatedly proven themselves to be far more than what the Council had initially assessed. Now, they had to find a way to strike back, decisively. The Council's tactics had always been based on overwhelming force, but it had become clear that brute strength alone wouldn't suffice in the face of an adversary as resourceful as humanity. Commander White, who had spent days combing through the aftermath of the failed invasion, stood before the Council once again. His expression was one of careful thought, but behind his eyes was the weight of the knowledge that humanity could, in fact, be the galaxy's most formidable opponent. The war, he realized, had only just begun. The Council's approach to war had always been one of sheer force. But now, he believed, the Council had to adapt in a way they had never done before. They would have to outsmart the humans, not simply overpower them. "We've tried force, but that didn't work," White began, his voice steady and commanding. "We've underestimated them at every turn. The moon was a failure, but the humans learned from it. They'll adapt again, and they'll turn whatever we throw at them into a weapon. But that doesn't mean we're defeated. It means we need to change our strategy." Reed, ever the skeptic, leaned forward, his scaled face furrowed in thought. "So, what do you propose, Commander?" White's gaze swept over the holographic map of Earth, which flickered before them. "We attack them where they think they're safest," he said quietly, as though letting the words settle in the chamber. "We strike at their economy." The room fell silent as the Council members processed his suggestion. Earth, after all, was a world of abundance: resources, industry, technology, all things that the Council could easily exploit. But White's idea was more than simply an economic strike. It was about unraveling the very fabric of human society. If they could cripple Earth's economy, they could destabilize their society and their ability to defend themselves. "We target their factories," White continued, his voice gaining strength, "the heart of their war machine. We don't need to destroy their infrastructure. We need to make it crumble from within. Human civilization thrives on constant production. What happens when that supply chain is broken? What happens when their workers are made to question their place in the war?" The proposal was met with murmurs of agreement. The Council's leaders realized that unlike the unyielding military might they had brought to bear against the humans, this new approach required subtlety, patience, and precision. It was a war of attrition, one that would attack the very structure of human civilization. Reed nodded slowly, though his eyes were still filled with doubt. "You're suggesting we attack their factories, their industries, cripple their entire infrastructure. And what? Force them to surrender?" White shook his head. "No, this isn't about surrender. This is about destabilizing their entire way of life. Once their supply lines are severed, their economies will grind to a halt. They'll be forced into a corner, and then they will either break or be forced to negotiate from a position of weakness." The Council debated the plan further, weighing the risks and rewards. White's proposal was daring, but it had the potential to fracture humanity at its core. The decision was made. The Galactic Council would focus its efforts on crippling Earth's economy, using cyber warfare, sabotage, and targeted strikes on key industries. The humans' greatest strength, their adaptability and relentless drive to innovate, was now their biggest vulnerability. It was time to hit them where it hurt most. Humanity's response: the calm before the storm. Back on Earth, Admiral Jones and the Earth Defense Force had just begun to catch their breath after the intense battles in space and on the moon. The Council had underestimated humanity's resilience, but they knew that the war wasn't over. In fact, the hardest battles were yet to come. "We've beaten them in space and on the moon, but we cannot afford to rest," Jones said, his voice firm as he addressed his commanders. "The Council will regroup, and they'll come at us with everything they've got. We've shown them our strength, but they'll try to break us. We can't let our guard down." Colonel Green, a sharp strategist, nodded. "They'll target our economy, you know. It's the only logical move. The Council thinks they can destroy us by targeting our industries and our supply chains. They'll try to cripple us where we're most vulnerable." Jones ran a hand through his graying hair, his mind racing. "Yes, they'll come after our factories, our fuel depots, our transport systems. They'll try to make us starve and weaken our resolve." But Jones wasn't about to let the Council get the upper hand. "We've shown them that we don't fight like they do. We're not bound by their rules, their expectations. We don't rely on brute force alone. We rely on creativity and flexibility. If they want to attack our economy, we'll make sure that every factory, every production line, is a weapon in itself. Let's make sure they know that we can adapt faster than they can attack." The human leadership gathered in their underground war room, deep within one of Earth's largest secure facilities. Plans were being drawn up for a massive counteroffensive, a counterattack designed to confuse, misdirect, and disrupt the Council's plan before it could gain traction. The humans had learned from their encounters with the Council. If they could turn the Council's tactics against them, they could achieve victory once again. Jones looked around at his staff, his eyes sharp. "We're going to give them a lesson they won't forget. We'll disrupt their communications, spread misinformation, and cause confusion among their forces. If the Council wants to make us fight for every resource, we'll make them pay for every step they take. Our workers won't be victims. They'll be soldiers." Colonel Green added, "We'll also reinforce our cyber defenses. The Council has powerful AIs and quantum encryption, but we'll find a way to break through their systems. If they try to infiltrate our networks, we'll flood their systems with counterattacks. We'll fight them on every front, and we won't stop until they understand that we won't back down." The Council strikes back. Cyber warfare and sabotage. The Galactic Council didn't waste any time. Their cyber armies, led by the most advanced quantum AIs, were already moving through Earth's communication systems, attempting to infiltrate military and industrial networks. At first, it seemed like an easy task. The humans' defense systems were good, but they were not built to withstand a full-scale assault by the Council's technology. But the humans had anticipated the attack. As the Council's AI attempted to breach Earth's network, it encountered something it had not expected: chaos. The humans flooded the systems with endless layers of false data, scrambled information, and decoy signals. They flooded the Council's quantum AI with misinformation and fake targets, trapping it in a labyrinth of irrelevant data. In the heart of the Council's command center, Commander White watched as his systems began to falter. His once imposing quantum AI was struggling against an unexpected onslaught. He scowled in disbelief. "How are they doing this? We've never seen anything like it." The AI's voice crackled in response, struggling to process the barrage of false information. "The humans have adapted. Their cyber tactics are primitive but unpredictable. We cannot isolate their defenses." White clenched his fists. "This is a disaster. We cannot afford to lose this battle. We need to neutralize their defenses now." Meanwhile, the human forces were preparing for their next move. They had seen how the Council's cyber attack had faltered and turned the tables. They knew the Council's AI systems could only function with perfect precision, and once that precision was undermined, the whole operation could fall apart. Admiral Jones watched with satisfaction as the human cyber defenses held strong. "They think they can outsmart us with their technology," he said, his voice tinged with quiet pride. "But they forgot one thing. Humans are more creative than they'll ever be. We don't just solve problems. We change the game entirely." Jones's strategy was working. The Council's cyber army, once considered unbeatable, was now embroiled in chaos. Earth's defense networks were no longer just protected. They were evolving faster than the Council could adapt. For every move the Council made, the humans had already anticipated it, preparing countermeasures that turned their technology into a weapon of their own.